There's finally some good news in regards to the coronavirus. A vaccine trial has begun this week. To talk more about it is our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles. Lisa, word is the vaccine being developed at a lab in Israel will take around, 18 months?
Yeah, it just goes to show you what goes into developing a vaccine, having the trials, going through all the different rounds of testing before something can come out onto the market. It's not going to be in this, in the current, it's not going to catch the momentum, is what I'm trying to say. This lab that you speak of in Israel, and I know Canada, the United States, and others in various labs are attempting to do the same. But this lab in Israel was coincidentally testing something very similar or the same type. Coronaviruses existed before this this strain of coronavirus, but this particular one or something very similar to it was being tested in Israel. So we kind of got a bit of a head start, not much, but again, they're saying if you think this is going to be rushed, anything less than 18 months, then we would be rushing it at our own risk. It's not going to be something that's going to be usable. So that's why the experts are warning the only way to stop the speed at which this is spreading and has become a global pandemic is to self-quarantine, to stay away as much as possible, to work from home, not leave home, particularly the age demographic 65 and over, that it would affect more drastically than the younger segments of the population.
Yeah, a lot of business owners have closed their businesses for now temporarily. I don't know how a lot of the small businesses will survive. A lot of schools have canceled classes. And where you are in California, your governor has closed, a lot of the bars, wineries, and there's some home isolation as well for seniors.
Yeah, so in California, they have now required that those over 65 not leave home. And of course, those in nursing homes as well, and bars and clubs, lounges, etc., gyms, dance studios, all mandatory closures. You know how it's very difficult. I know many of our friends here have canceled, those who come to their home to clean, or their nannies or babysitters. They're canceling doctor's appointments. They're canceling, anything that's not an absolute emergency, and electing to stay home. And as you said, that's putting a huge burden on these individuals, on the economy. How will these people pay their bills? And as you know, those bills go on, even though they're not working and not bringing in an income, particularly for the day workers. So, this is going to be, it's going to be something very serious to speak of. But, the government's doing what they can to mitigate the economic effects at the very least. And hopefully, again, as I said, they're urging people to be cautious, to be pragmatic, not to go out if they don't have to. And the sooner we can kind of flatten the curve, as they say, then the sooner people can go back to business as usual and continue with their lives.
Dr. Dina Henshaw, who's the Chief Officer of Health here, Medical Officer of Health in Alberta, she's talked a lot about social distancing, making sure you wash your hands. But I've noticed here, especially in the airports here and south of the border, there's not a lot of social distancing, as thousands of people are arriving from Europe, some possibly sick with COVID-19.
Yes, Hal, if you've seen these photos, and I'm sure you have, the people are literally standing back to back to back to back, and you just can feel them breathing on each other. And, so much for social distancing and so much for keeping within 6 feet of each other. My cousin's wedding was actually canceled this past Saturday night because the mandate here was that you cannot gather more than 250 people. And if there are fewer than 250 people, then there has to be a situation where people can at least stand 6 feet apart, where in a wedding, they could not do that. And here you're looking at the airports where we do have a travel ban to Europe, but how about from places like Europe and elsewhere where you see these people at the airport, they're just packed like sardines and obviously breathing all over each other. I know here at the local airport at LAX, there was yet another TSA worker who came down with the virus just in the past 24 hours. So, again, if you don't have to travel, don't. And if you're coming back into the country, well, I know you have to pass through the airport, but otherwise there should be a 14-day quarantine that follows your arrival.
The novel coronavirus has dominated the early stage of the Joe Biden-Bernie Sanders Democratic debate. Lisa, both White House hopefuls portrayed themselves as better equipped to handle the crisis than U.S. President Donald Trump.
Right. So there's a lot of politicizing of this. As the political climate in the United States has been so politicized that whether Whoever and however this would have been handled, there would have been criticism. So at first, if you recall, Donald Trump called the travel ban from China, and he was called a xenophobe by actually Joe Biden himself. And it was criticized. How could he prevent people of Chinese origin from coming into this country? Well, they have a virus that we don't want to catch. And now, when we're this deep into it, we're wondering why he didn't do it sooner, why he didn't, prepare the kits sooner, everything sooner. And meanwhile, when he did take action, it was criticized. So, I think it's in very poor taste to politicize this. It's in very poor taste to say that they could have done a better job. I think right now the only thing we can do as Americans is to say, let's try our best to keep everyone alive and safe and healthy. I know Canada's dealing with this, and I know Trudeau, it hit so close to home for him and his wife. And again, it's hit everyone. That's the bottom line here, that no one is immune. It's hit Hollywood, like Tom Hanks and his wife. It's hit people that are high in power. We know Brazil and Bolsonaro and his family and their advisors and the people who surround them, and the Iranian regime. And the list goes on. So, this is not a time where we can sit and point fingers, but to do what's best to curb this.
Iran has reported its single biggest day jump of coronavirus deaths. The president of Iran has ruled out quarantine, and officials are warning of overwhelmed healthcare facilities, no doubt.
Right. Obviously, this is overwhelming for the people of Iran, for the health facilities that are already suffering because of the sanctions. And I say this, there's such a nuance here that is not being portrayed in the media. They aren't suffering because of sanctions, but because of the sanctions, the government has created a void in the health arena that has existed from before coronavirus, because they can blame the United States and the West and say, well, there are sanctions, therefore you cannot get your cancer treatment, therefore you cannot get your diabetes medication, etc. And that is how they created this hatred for the West and a movement to have people push against sanctions and to petition to have the sanctions removed. Now, the Iranian government would want nothing more than a distraction, because as you remember, just a month ago, the people were still out on the streets, they were still protesting, and now what are the people doing? They're worried about catching coronavirus. So, of course, they've ruled out quarantine, because why not have this spread? Why not have this mass hysteria to keep the people's minds and hearts busy while they continue with their own shenanigans politically?
Here's an interesting story. ISIS is advising terrorists to avoid Europe for jihad because of the coronavirus. I mean, maybe that's some good news there.
Well, it's saying, why die of coronavirus when you can die by strapping yourself with a suicide vest, right? You're not going to go out as a martyr if you're taken out by coronavirus. You only go out as a martyr if you take a few innocent people with you. It's so silly to see headlines like these, and of course they're being covered by the mainstream media. I actually tweeted it not too long ago and saying, look, even ISIS is advising that you be pragmatic and not go out there. So, Europe, of course, is being hit very hard with all of this. The countries across Europe are like states for Canada or the United States. They are so small and so close, and people travel so freely and easily across borders. And this has spread, and again, the latency period of this virus being so incredibly long that people have passed it to dozens before even seeing the symptoms within themselves. So, of course, this is an issue with Europe, and ISIS, of course, seizing the opportunities to carry out their jihad over there, saying, don't go there.
Italy's coronavirus cases saw their largest daily jump, Lisa. The death toll in that country now has topped 1,800, but there were almost 3,600 new cases, which made for the biggest one-day increase so far.
Yeah, so outside of China, we know that Italy is the second largest hit country, and they have so many cases and more coming up each day. They don't have the facilities, they're spread thin. They kind of wanted to stop travel outside of Italy and into Italy. But what happened was people were traveling north-south, and then they spread the virus that way as well. So they've done mandatory quarantine at this point, closing down all non-essential businesses, and really encouraging people to stay home so that they do not spread this virus any further than it's already spread in that country.
Meanwhile, in Spain, Lisa, health officials reported the country's death toll from COVID-19 went from 136 to 288 overnight. Apparently, there are close to 7,800 people infected there.
Yes, and it looks like in other countries in Europe, France and Spain being the next two, where it's spreading very quickly as well. Spain saw a very sudden surge, which means that a lot of more cases will be coming up. When we see the sudden surge, it means that there are silent carriers of this virus that are spreading it very quickly. So you only see this, this surge in cases when the latency period is over and people start showing their symptoms. So it's incredibly, incredibly important. I can't say this enough, probably the seventh time I'm saying it in this broadcast, but it's so important to self-quarantine, even if you're not showing any symptoms, because this is how the virus is spreading. And really, our hearts go out to all of Europe and these cities that are particularly burdened with cases and the number of sick people that they can't handle.
The UK, like many regions around the world, Lisa, is looking at a plan to have anyone over the age of 70 isolate from the virus for a number of months. Tell me more about that.
Right, and this is just a thought that's being discussed in the UK. Something that California almost has done. Again, if you are over the age of 65, in this case the UK is saying 70, but if you're over the age of 65, and if you have respiratory or cardiovascular issues, that's only compounding your chances of dealing with this virus. If you are immunosuppressed of any age, that also compromises your chances of dealing with the virus. Look, it is a very aggressive respiratory virus. So anybody who is dealing with a heart condition or lung condition, asthma, a weak immune system, and over again the age of 65, well, it's better to be cautious than to put your risk out there. Look, many of these people are either in nursing homes or are retired. So, if you are in that category, then, it's a no-brainer to sit home and what's difficult is that they can't have caregivers. They can't have, their family and their grandchildren and their children visit. They're lonely, and it brings up a slew of other issues for this segment of the population. But again, it's better safe than sorry. They have to really urge them to be cautious and to self-quarantine if possible.
China has apparently launched a coronavirus propaganda drive to help boost their international image by quite a bit. Lisa, that image has taken quite a beating on the international stage.
Absolutely. That's where the virus came from. Before this was ever an issue, when we weren't discussing it in Canada or the United States, we were watching people drop like flies in the middle of the street in Wuhan, dealing with this virus. So it's a reality that they have to deal with. No amount of money that they spend with this propaganda that it started in the United States or it was imported into China is going to really help that change that perception of that reality. Now, we had a hit here, a cyber security hit on the health, not Ministry of Health, but our health organization, the governmental health organization here overnight. And I think that is something that the government is looking into. No fingers have been pointed yet at China, but they are obviously discussing whether or not that could be part of the China propaganda campaign to change the perception again, or to go on the offensive and say, look, it was the United States. This is a continuation of a long, drawn out war of words and actions and tariffs and more, and now viruses between the United States and China, and unfortunately, it continues.
Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles. Lisa, stay safe.
You too. Thank you.